In the opening scene, Derek Jennings stands confidently alone at the defendant's table, facing Judge Robert Peterson and the bank's attorney, Sandra Fisher. Despite lacking a formal legal background, Derek's demeanor reflects a quiet assurance. He knows the stakes are high, as he's not just fighting for his family's home but for the principle of justice. As a self-represented individual in a legal battle that seems stacked against him, Derek feels the weight of the moment. He's up against a powerful institution, but he's determined to make his case heard. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If this story made you reflect, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful content. The contrast between Derek's raw determination and the professional confidence of Sandra, the attorney representing the bank, is stark. She's poised, calm, and prepared, everything Derek feels he's not. Yet, as the court session unfolds, Derek's confidence remains unshaken. He's had no choice but to navigate the legal process on his own, relying on his sharp instincts and the belief that his cause is just. His position in the courtroom underscores the gap between the average person and those who wield legal and financial power. But Derek's quiet resilience hints that this fight is far from over. Derek Jennings sits at the kitchen table, the harsh morning light cutting through the blinds as he sifts through a pile of mail. His fingers freeze when he pulls out an eviction notice addressed to him. The letter feels heavy, almost like a weight sinking into his chest. His heart races as he reads the words, each one more troubling than the last. His family home, the place his late mother had worked tirelessly to secure, is now at risk. As Derek stares at the document, a sinking feeling grows inside him. He had always believed in the security of his property, the place where he had built his life. The thought of losing it, the home where his mother had worked so hard to ensure a future, feels unbearable. But what catches his attention more than the eviction itself is the mention of a second mortgage that he never knew about. A suspicion begins to form in his mind: could this second mortgage have been forged? The doubt gnaws at him, pushing him to investigate further. This discovery sparks a fire inside Derek, a resolve to uncover the truth behind the mortgage and fight back against what he suspects might be a fraudulent act. Derek Jennings picks up the phone, his hand trembling slightly as he dials the number for the bank. After a few rings, a representative answers, and he quickly explains his situation. He's received an eviction notice, and there's talk of a defaulted mortgage that he doesn't recall ever agreeing to. His frustration builds as the conversation drags on. The representative informs him of an alleged default on the mortgage, despite the fact that Derek has always made timely payments and even holds the original deed for the property. As Derek tries to make sense of the situation, he's met with a wall of indifference from the bank representative. The more he presses, the more he feels as though he's getting nowhere. The representative keeps repeating the same information, offering no solutions or explanations. Derek feels helpless. His confusion and frustration deepen as he realizes that, despite his proof of ownership, the bank is claiming a default that doesn't seem to match the facts. His blood boils as the call ends without resolution, leaving him with more questions than answers. But Derek knows one thing for sure: he cannot let this go. He needs answers, and he will stop at nothing to get them. Derek Jennings walks into the bank's main branch, his pulse quickening as he approaches the desk of Darren Klein, the bank manager. The confrontation that has been building since the eviction notice and the call with the bank representative is now unavoidable. Derek's mind is racing, fueled by frustration and a growing suspicion of foul play. He's determined to get answers, to find out why his family is being targeted, and to confront the bank head-on. As he approaches Darren's office, he notices the manager's dismissive glance as Derek enters. Klein doesn't rise to greet him, nor does he acknowledge the urgency in Derek's voice when he explains his situation. Instead, the bank manager remains cool and composed, almost as if Derek's concerns were beneath him. "I've already spoken to the bank, and you've explained everything," Derek says, his voice rising slightly. "But no one seems to care that this eviction notice is based on something I didn't even know existed. I need to know why you're claiming this mortgage default." This doesn't add up. Darren Klein, looking unbothered, responds with a cold tone. I'm not sure what you expect me to do. The bank's records show a default, and I'm afraid there's nothing I can do about it. You might want to hire a lawyer. Derek feels a rush of anger but holds it back. A lawyer? I can't afford a lawyer, he snaps, his voice growing more desperate. This is my home. I need to know how this happened. Klein shrugs, offering no help. Well, you'll need to take that up with someone else. There's nothing I can do. Derek leaves the office, a heavy sense of helplessness settling over him. But deep down, he knows this fight is far from over. Derek Jennings walks out of the bank feeling a mixture of anger and frustration. The conversation with Darren Klein had gone nowhere, leaving him even more determined to uncover the truth behind the eviction and the mysterious second mortgage. He couldn't understand why no one seemed to care about his family's history with this house, especially when he had the original deed in hand. The weight of the situation only deepens as he steps onto the sidewalk, realizing that his options are growing limited. He needs help, but it feels like the world is closing in around him. He had heard that local politicians often helped constituents in tough situations, so he decides to visit Councilman Greg Matthews, who had served in the area for years and was known for his strong stance on local issues. Derek hopes that perhaps the councilman can offer advice or connect him with legal resources that could help him fight the bank's wrongful actions. He knows he can't do this on his own. The next morning, Derek enters the councilman's office with a sense of cautious optimism, hoping for a solution to his mounting problems. The receptionist greets him, and after a brief exchange, Derek is shown into Councilman Matthews' office. He sits across from the councilman, who seems to be in a rush but still takes the time to listen to Derek's story. I'm having issues with my home, Derek begins, trying to keep his voice steady. I've been served with an eviction notice for a mortgage I never agreed to. My mother worked so hard to secure this place for our family, and now, without explanation, the bank is saying I'm in default. I've tried to get answers, but I'm hitting dead ends everywhere. I need help. Can you point me in the right direction? Councilman Matthews listens attentively for a few moments, nodding slowly, his brow furrowed as Derek speaks. However, as Derek finishes his explanation, the councilman leans back in his chair and exhales deeply, his face betraying a hint of uncertainty. Derek, I understand what you're going through, truly, Matthews says, his voice calm but laced with a kind of resignation. The situation you're describing sounds frustrating and unfair, but unfortunately, this isn't something I can directly intervene in. The city can't get involved in private contractual disputes like this one. Banks have a lot of power, and the legal system can be difficult to navigate without proper representation. Derek's heart sinks at the councilman's words, but he tries to keep his emotions in check. But this isn't just a legal issue. This is my family's home, and it's being taken from me for something I didn't do. How can you just sit back and say there's nothing that can be done? The councilman's face softens, but the weight of the situation seems to leave him at a loss. Look, Derek, I wish I could offer you more. But at this point, the best advice I can give you is to start looking for other housing options. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but fighting the bank will be a long and expensive battle. I know people who've been through similar situations, and it's not easy. You're up against a big system. Derek is stunned by the councilman's response. He had hoped for a solution, some way to challenge the system that seemed so intent on stripping him of his family's legacy. Instead, he feels like he's been told to give up, to simply accept that this is the way things work. You're telling me to just walk away? Derek asks, disbelief creeping into his voice. After everything my mother did for this house, for this family? You want me to give up? Councilman Matthews sighs, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not saying give up, but sometimes it's better to cut your losses and move forward. Look, I can connect you with some housing resources, places that can help you find a new home. It's not ideal, but it's a way to move on. Derek stands up abruptly, feeling the heat of frustration rise in his chest. He's been fighting for so long, and now, in his moment of need, he's being told to give up. He grips the armrest of the chair, trying to control his emotions. "You're just going to tell me to move on," he repeats, his voice steady but laced with anger. "This house is my mother's legacy. I won't just walk away from it." He turns and walks out of the office without waiting for the councilman's reply, his anger and helplessness mounting with every step. The words echo in his mind, "Look for other housing options." He refuses to accept it. He refuses to accept that his mother's work, his family's hard-earned home, should just be tossed aside because a corrupt system says so. As Derek steps out onto the street, he feels more alone than ever. He thought the councilman would be the one person who could help him, but instead, he's been met with apathy and an unwillingness to fight. It's clear now that he can't rely on the system or the people in power to fight for him. He will have to fight this battle on his own, no matter what it takes. His determination hardens, and he knows this fight is far from over. Derek won't be silenced. He won't back down. His family's legacy is worth more than giving up, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to protect it. The struggle ahead may be difficult, but Derek is prepared to face it head-on. Derek Jennings knew the fight to save his home was far from over, but nothing could have prepared him for the next blow. His frustrations with the bank and the broken promises from local officials had already taken their toll, yet he remained determined to uncover the truth behind the second mortgage and find a way to hold the bank accountable. But when the bank escalated their actions in an unexpected and cruel way, Derek's resolve only deepened. It was a quiet afternoon when the notice came, another blow that left Derek reeling. His car, the only mode of transportation his family had to get around, was repossessed. The bank had sent a tow truck to seize it without any prior warning, leaving Derek in disbelief. How could they do this to him? He had been trying to work things out, and yet, it felt like the bank was doubling down on its efforts to break him, to strip him of everything he had fought for. The first inkling of something was wrong had appeared weeks ago when the eviction notice had arrived. Derek had hoped it was a mistake, that somehow the issue with the second mortgage could be cleared up with a simple call. But as the days dragged on and the bank's actions grew bolder, Derek started to realize that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. The bank wasn't just looking to collect on a defaulted loan, they were determined to take everything he had. The repossession of his car was a gut punch. It wasn't just about losing the vehicle, it was the fact that it symbolized something much bigger. The bank had effectively crippled him. Without a car, his ability to get to work, to take care of his family, to even try to fight back against the injustice he was facing, was severely limited. This move, he realized, was a tactic. The bank wanted him broken, wanted him to give up. But Derek wasn't going to let that happen. His anger was palpable as he stood outside his empty driveway, staring at the spot where his car had once been. It was hard to ignore the feeling that the bank, with its vast resources and power, had already won, except Derek knew that he couldn't afford to let himself think like that. If he gave in to despair, then they truly would have taken everything. His mother's legacy, his home, his future, everything would be lost. He spent the rest of the evening pacing in his living room, going over the options in his head. He had already spoken to a few lawyers, but the legal fees were exorbitant. He didn't have the money to pursue this in court. The idea of giving up was unacceptable to him, but it felt like every door was being slammed shut. He couldn't help but think that the bank was using its influence to force him into submission. How many others were going through the same thing and didn't have the resources to fight back? The next day, Derek did what he could to keep his head above water. He walked into work early, determined to put in a full day's effort, even though his mind was preoccupied. His co-workers noticed the tension in his shoulders, the strain on his face, but Derek kept his thoughts to himself. He didn't want to burden them with his troubles. His battle with the bank was his alone to fight. Yet, as the day wore on, it became clear to Derek that he couldn't fight this battle alone. The bank's retaliation had escalated, but so too did his determination to stand up for his family. Later that week, Derek sat at his kitchen table, his laptop open to the local news. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his mind was focused. He knew that he needed to do something drastic, something that would draw attention to his case. It wasn't just about saving his home anymore, it was about exposing the corruption that was running rampant in the financial system. As he scrolled through social media, an idea began to form. He reached out to a few local activist groups that had been known for supporting people in his situation, the Justice Collective. They had worked on several cases of unfair bank practices, and their reputation for taking on large corporations was well known. Derek wasn't sure what kind of response he'd get, but he couldn't keep fighting in the shadows. If he was going to stand a chance, he needed allies. To his surprise, he received a message within the hour. The Justice Collective was interested in his case and wanted to meet with him. Derek was cautiously optimistic. This could be the break he needed. If the group could help him mobilize support, he could put enough pressure on the bank to force a resolution. The following week, Derek met with the leaders of the Justice Collective at a community center. They listened intently as he laid out his story, the eviction notice, the repossession of his car, the fraudulent second mortgage, and the countless phone calls to the bank that had yielded no answers. The group was shocked by what Derek had endured, and they assured him they would stand behind him. They would help him gather support, raise awareness, and amplify his voice. With their help, Derek began to gather momentum. He shared his story with local news outlets, and soon enough, the media coverage began to snowball. The more people who heard his story, the more others came forward with similar experiences. Derek's fight was no longer just about one man standing up to a corrupt system, it was becoming a movement. The bank's actions had pushed Derek to the brink, but they had also sparked a collective effort that had the power to challenge the very system that had oppressed him. Derek knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but with the Justice Collective and the support of the growing movement behind him, he finally felt like he wasn't fighting alone. The bank had made a mistake, it had underestimated the power of a determined individual and the strength of a united community. Derek's resolve hardened, and he made a promise to himself, he would not stop until justice was served, no matter what it took. Derek Jennings sat in his car, parked in the lot just outside the courthouse, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The adrenaline coursed through him as he prepared for the confrontation that was about to unfold. His thoughts were scattered, he had been fighting for so long, and this was the moment where everything would either come to a head or crumble around him. The bank had pushed him to the edge, but now it was time to make them see that he wasn't going down without a fight. Derek had spent weeks preparing for this moment. With the help of the Justice Collective and the media attention his case had garnered, he now had the leverage to take on the bank. The fight had been long and exhausting, but he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for his family's home, for his mother's legacy, and for anyone else who had been trampled by a corrupt system. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Sarah, a volunteer from the Justice Collective who had been working with him on his case. The message was short, but it filled Derek with a renewed sense of determination. "We're with you today. Just focus on getting the truth out." Derek smiled to himself, knowing that he wasn't standing alone in this. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, the sound of his boots hitting the pavement loud in the otherwise quiet lot. His heart pounded as he walked toward the courthouse, a building that now felt like a battleground. As he entered the courtroom, the weight of the moment hit him. The high ceilings, the cold stone walls, and the long rows of seats seemed to close in around him, but Derek stood tall, resolute. This was his fight, and he would not let the bank's power intimidate him. Inside, the courtroom was already filled with people, witnesses, reporters, and legal representatives from both sides. Derek took his seat at the defendant's table, his eyes briefly scanning the room. On the opposite side, seated with an air of arrogance, was Bryce Lambert, the bank's attorney, who had spent the last several months trying to discredit Derek's claims and make him seem like a man grasping at straws. Next to him sat the bank's representative, Darren Klein, the manager who had brushed Derek off countless times and dismissed him as a nuisance. And then there was Judge Ethan Crawley, a man whose stern demeanor seemed to reflect the weight of the entire system stacked against Derek. Judge Crawley was known for his tough rulings, and Derek knew this would not be an easy case to win. But with everything he had been through, the eviction notice, the car repossession, the fraudulent mortgage documents, it was impossible for Derek to remain silent any longer. He had the truth on his side, and he was determined to make the court see that. The trial began with the usual formalities, with both sides laying out their arguments. Bryce Lambert was the first to speak. His voice was smooth and confident as he began outlining the bank's case, presenting the mortgage default as a clear-cut matter of contract. He painted Derek as a man who had failed to meet his financial obligations, a man who had ignored his responsibilities and was now trying to escape the consequences. As he spoke, Derek's blood boiled. Everything Lambert said was a distortion of the truth. Derek had always paid his mortgage on time. His mother had worked tirelessly to secure the home for their family, and now, with her passing, Derek had been left to navigate the treacherous waters of a corrupt financial system. He knew that the mortgage the bank was claiming didn't exist, at least, not in the form they were presenting it. It was a forgery, a manipulation of the records to take advantage of someone who couldn't fight back. When it was his turn, Derek stood and walked to the podium. His heart raced as he looked out at the sea of faces, but he knew this was his moment. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly as he placed his notes on the stand. "Your Honor, members of the court," Derek began, his voice cutting through the room. "I stand before you today not just as a man trying to save his home, but as someone who has been wronged by a system that is supposed to protect people like me. I've worked hard all my life, and this home, it's all I have left of my mother. She fought for it. She worked day and night to make sure I had a future, and now, because of a second mortgage that I never agreed to, the bank is trying to take it all away from me." The room was silent, all eyes fixed on Derek. He could feel the weight of their attention, but he pressed on, his voice growing stronger. "The bank has provided no real proof that I defaulted on any mortgage. In fact, the documents they've presented, those so-called loan agreements, are forgeries. The second mortgage doesn't exist in any of the records I have, and I've been in contact with experts who will attest to that. This isn't about me failing to pay a debt, this is about a system that has used my ignorance and my financial situation to take what is rightfully mine. The bank is lying to you, and I'm here to expose it." There was a murmur in the courtroom, and Derek could feel a shift in the air. His words had struck a chord. He wasn't just fighting for his family's home, he was speaking up for everyone who had been trampled by the system, everyone who had been taken advantage of by institutions that held all the power. Derek continued, outlining the sequence of events that led him to believe the bank was operating illegally. He presented evidence, emails, recordings, and expert testimony, that demonstrated how the second mortgage had been forged, how the bank had misrepresented facts to justify their actions. As Derek spoke, he could see Bryce Lambert's face tightening. The confidence that had once radiated from the bank's legal team was now replaced with unease. It was clear they hadn't expected Derek to be this prepared, this determined. The tide was turning, and Derek felt the weight of his years of hard work and the support of the Justice Collective pushing him forward. When Derek finished, the courtroom fell into silence. Judge Crawley took a long moment before addressing both sides. "Mr. Jennings, your case is compelling," the judge said, his tone more measured than before. "I will review all the evidence presented and render my decision in due time. This court will not tolerate any fraudulent activity, and it is clear that the bank's actions have raised serious questions. We will ensure that the truth is uncovered." Derek nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't over yet, but he had done everything he could. He had spoken the truth, and now it was up to the court to act. As Derek left the courthouse, the weight of the day settled over him. He had faced down the bank, and though the outcome was still uncertain, he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to give up. His mother's legacy, his home, and his future were on the line, and Derek would fight until the very end. The battle was far from over, but the first victory had been won. Derek had shown the world that even when the odds were stacked against you, determination and the pursuit of justice could change everything. Derek Jennings couldn't sleep that night. His mind was racing, the events of the day still fresh in his thoughts. The trial had taken a dramatic turn in his favor, but he knew that winning in court wasn't enough. The fight against the bank wasn't just about him, it was about exposing the systemic issues that allowed corporations to exploit people like him. If he wanted to have any chance of holding the bank accountable and protecting his family's home, he needed more than just a legal victory. He needed to turn public opinion in his favor. He needed the media. The morning after the trial, Derek met with members of the Justice Collective. They had been by his side from the very beginning, helping him prepare his case, offering advice, and providing crucial resources that he couldn't afford on his own. They had been instrumental in getting the truth out to the public, and now, they were ready to escalate the situation. Derek, the momentum's building, Sarah, one of the lead organizers for the Justice Collective, said as they gathered around a small table in their community office. The media is already picking up on your case, but we need to keep pushing. If we can get your story into the mainstream news, we'll have the leverage to force the bank to act. Derek nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. He had never been one for the spotlight. His life had always been quiet, focused on his family and the things that mattered most. But now, with the fight for his home in full swing, Derek realized that staying silent was no longer an option. He had to speak out, not just for himself, but for the countless others who were suffering in silence, crushed by a system that was designed to benefit the wealthy at the expense of the vulnerable. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this attention," Derek admitted, his voice laced with uncertainty. "What if it backfires? What if the bank just digs in their heels even harder?" "Listen, Derek," Sarah said, her tone firm yet reassuring. "This isn't just about your case anymore. The more people hear about how the bank is trying to destroy your family's legacy, the more they'll start to realize that this is a larger problem. This is about people being taken advantage of by the very institutions that are supposed to protect them. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for all of us." Derek took a deep breath and looked around the room at the group of people who had become his support system. He knew Sarah was right. The system was broken, and if he didn't take a stand, who would? The idea of exposing his personal struggle to the public felt daunting, but it was clear that it was the only way to make the bank take him seriously. He couldn't let the fear of backlash stop him from pushing forward. With a renewed sense of purpose, Derek agreed. "Okay. Let's do it. Let's get my story out there." The Justice Collective immediately set to work, contacting journalists from local news outlets and arranging interviews. Derek was hesitant, but as he spoke with reporters and shared his story, he began to feel a sense of empowerment. The more he spoke, the more he realized that his fight wasn't just about his family. It was about exposing the corrupt practices that had been allowed to go on unchecked for far too long. The media coverage began to snowball. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon, Derek was featured in interviews across multiple platforms. His story resonated with people, and the sympathy for his plight quickly turned into outrage. Viewers, listeners, and readers alike were shocked by the way the bank had manipulated the system to seize his home, and they were even more outraged by the way he had been treated. The coverage didn't just stop with Derek's case, it sparked a conversation about the larger issues at play, issues of systemic injustice, corporate greed, and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. As the media buzz grew louder, Derek began to feel the weight of the public's attention. He had become a symbol of resistance, a figure who was standing up to the system in a way that many people had longed to do but had been too afraid or too powerless to attempt. He began receiving messages of support from strangers, people who had heard his story and felt compelled to reach out. Some offered legal advice, others simply expressed their solidarity, but all of them reinforced the growing sense that Derek wasn't just a lone man fighting the system, he was part of a larger movement. One evening, after an interview with a prominent news outlet, Sarah called Derek with exciting news. "Derek, we've got national attention now. The Justice Collective has connected you with activists from all over the country, and the media is running with this story. This isn't just local anymore, this is going viral." Derek felt a surge of emotion as Sarah's words sank in. What had started as a fight to save his family's home was now a battle that was being fought on a national scale. The bank's actions, which had seemed so unstoppable at first, were now under intense scrutiny. The media was no longer just reporting on his case, they were holding the bank accountable, pushing for answers, and demanding change. But with the attention came pressure. The bank, now facing widespread public outrage, began to push back harder. They hired more lawyers, pulled strings, and used their considerable resources to try to discredit Derek's case. They labeled him as a troublemaker, someone who was stirring up unnecessary conflict. The more the media reported on Derek's story, the more the bank escalated their tactics. Yet, instead of backing down, Derek's resolve only grew stronger. The media spotlight was now on him, and he wasn't about to let it fade. He continued to speak out, joining interviews, writing op-eds, and sharing his story on social media. He knew that the only way to stop the bank's corrupt practices was to keep the pressure on, to keep the story in the public eye. As the pressure mounted, Derek found an ally in an unexpected place. The Justice Collective connected him with legal experts who volunteered their time to help him navigate the complex legal landscape. These experts helped him gather further evidence, build a more robust case, and strategize on how to confront the bank head-on. The fight had become much bigger than just one man. Derek had ignited a movement, and his unwavering commitment to justice had become a beacon for others who had been similarly mistreated by the system. The media's coverage was shining a light on the systemic problems within the banking industry, and Derek's case was at the center of it all. He wasn't just fighting for his home anymore. He was fighting for the future of thousands of families who were at risk of losing their homes to fraudulent practices. The power of the media, combined with the support of the Justice Collective, had turned the tide in Derek's favor. But the fight wasn't over yet. With the national spotlight on him, Derek knew the next steps would be crucial. The momentum was on his side, but he had to keep pushing, keep fighting. He had to make sure that the bank paid for its actions, and that others would be protected from the same fate. Derek wasn't just a man fighting for his house anymore. He was a leader in a movement for justice, and nothing was going to stop him. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Derek Jennings stood before Judge Ethan Crawley, ready to present the key piece of evidence that could change everything. His hands were steady, his mind focused, and his resolve stronger than ever. After months of relentless struggle against the bank and their attempts to take away his family's home, this was his moment, the moment he could finally expose the truth and hold the bank accountable for its actions. Derek had gathered the evidence meticulously, working with the Justice Collective and legal experts who had supported his case. Now, standing before the judge, he was ready to lay it all out. The forged documents, the missing signatures, the irregularities in the bank's records, it was all there. He had studied the technicalities and knew the evidence inside and out. This wasn't just about his fight to save his home, it was about exposing the corrupt practices that had allowed the bank to take advantage of countless families, just like his. He walked to the podium, the courtroom quieting as he began to speak. "Your Honor, members of the court, I stand before you today not just as someone seeking justice for my own family, but as a representative of all the families who have been wronged by institutions like the one I'm up against today. The bank claims that I defaulted on a mortgage I never signed, that I'm in violation of a contract that, quite frankly, isn't even valid. I've come here to show you why that claim is nothing more than a lie." With that, Derek began to present the evidence he had painstakingly collected. He handed over copies of the documents to the court, including the forged second mortgage agreement that had been added to his name without his consent. As the judge reviewed the papers, Derek continued, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "These documents," Derek said, pointing to the copies on the table, "were fabricated. They were never signed by me, and they don't even match the legal standards required for a legitimate mortgage. I've had this verified by several experts who have examined the records and confirmed the forgery." The room fell silent as the evidence spoke for itself. Derek could feel the shift in the atmosphere. He wasn't just making accusations, he was presenting the hard facts that proved his case. The bank had no answers for the discrepancies, and their attorney, Bryce Lambert, seemed less sure of himself than ever before. Lambert rose to challenge the evidence, but Derek was ready for him. "Your Honor," Lambert began, trying to regain control, "these documents may appear questionable, but the bank's records show," Derek interrupted. "The bank's records? These are the same records that have been manipulated to create a false narrative. The same records that have already caused irreparable harm to my family. I'm not here to dispute the bank's claims. I'm here to expose them." Judge Crawley paused for a moment, his eyes moving from Derek to the bank's attorney. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. For the first time in the case, the bank's position seemed less secure, its grip on the situation slipping. Derek felt a wave of hope wash over him. The fight was far from over, but with the evidence in front of him, he could see the light at the end of the tunnel. This wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for anyone who had ever been taken advantage of by a financial institution. This case was about accountability, transparency, and, most importantly, the pursuit of justice. As Judge Crawley prepared to deliberate, Derek could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him. He had fought not just for his own home but for a future where people like him could stand up and make their voices heard. The media attention, the support from the Justice Collective, and his own unrelenting determination had brought him here. This moment was a turning point, not just in his life, but in the larger fight against the corruption that plagued the system. Derek stood tall, knowing that no matter what the outcome, he had made a difference. He had exposed the truth, and that, in itself, was a victory. Now, all he could do was wait for the judge's ruling, and hope that the truth would finally prevail. The moment the court issued its ruling, Derek Jennings felt a wave of relief wash over him. Judge Ethan Crawley's decision was a decisive victory, a recognition that the bank's actions were not only unethical but illegal. The evidence Derek had painstakingly gathered, along with the testimony provided by experts, had been enough to expose the truth. The bank was found guilty of fraudulent practices, and Derek's home, the one his mother had worked so hard to secure, was no longer at risk. But the impact of the ruling went far beyond Derek's case. The media, which had been closely following the trial, immediately reported the court's decision, and the story went viral. The Justice Collective's tireless support and Derek's unwavering determination had sparked a larger conversation about the corrupt practices of the banking industry. The public outrage was palpable, and people across the country rallied behind Derek, demanding change. As the pressure mounted, the bank began to feel the consequences. Their stocks dropped, and customer complaints flooded in. The financial institution, once seen as invincible, was now scrambling to manage the fallout. Board members resigned, and the CEO made a public apology, though many felt it was too little, too late. For Derek, the victory was bittersweet. He had won his home back, but the fight had come at a cost. Still, he felt a deep sense of pride in what he had accomplished. His case had inspired others to stand up against corruption, and the ripple effect of his victory was undeniable. Derek had started a movement, one that would continue to grow, challenging the systems of power that had kept people like him oppressed for far too long. The battle wasn't over, but Derek had proven that with unity, perseverance, and the pursuit of truth, even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable.